Chapter 11. Vadi plays devil's advocate. In the gardens of Hyrule. An ambush.
This is simply unacceptable, Princess. Unacceptable.
The diminutive Chancellor Cole paced back and forth in front of Zelda, gesticulating wildly in frustration. She glanced sideways at Russell standing beside her throne, noticing the look of open contempt on his face. Behind Cole was Vadi, trying his best to look innocent but failing miserably.
First tutor is assassinated within this very castle, and nobody's heard from Magistrate Ingo in 3 days. And don't tell me you don't know what's happened to him. That is 2 of our magistrates murdered now, Princess, 2. The council is prepared to seize power from the throne if something is not done to remedy the situation. Seize power?
Zelda asked, not bothering to keep the derision out of her voice.
Might I remind you that the council functions as a purely administrative body, and that any and all power you wield is only because I deign it so.
Cole's face turned a splotchy red, and his mustache heaved.
You are not as secure as you think you are, Princess. Your efficiency as a ruler is being questioned, up and down the ranks. Why, even your own vizier.
Cole hastily stopped himself, but too late. Behind him Vadi scowled. Russell spoke.
You know, Vadi,
he stared down at the diminutive mage,
I was about to ask just what you had to do with this mess. Explain yourself.
He smiled. Everybody in the room could see straight through him.
I merely agreed with the Chancellor's complaint about the safety of our citizens and officials, and felt that it should be brought to your Highness' attention. Now is not the time for your power plays, you ungrateful little.
Zelda silenced Russell with one hand and used the other to cut off Vadi's heated response before it got started.
Very well, then, Chancellor. What do you recommend be done? That all military and legal authority be granted to the administration on a provisional.
Russell scoffed audibly, and Cole stopped.
Is there a problem, Commandant?
This time there was no silencing him.
For the gods' sake, Cole, the Gerudo uprising is fast becoming a crisis, and the last thing we need is dissent within our own ranks. And you, Vadi, have you no loyalty? No sense of? Of course it is a crisis, you fool.
Vadi spat.
And our leader has failed us, in case you hadn't noticed. How this indifference can pass for leadership, I'll never comprehend.
Cole began to stammer a response, stifled by the sudden movement of the Commandant. Russell shunted Cole out of the way and drew his sword, glaring at Vadi.
I'll not stand here and listen to you spout such lies. Defend yourself.
Vadi made no movement, but a faint breeze blew where there had previously been none.
Russell! Your loyalty blinds you. You don't understand the danger we're in.
Zelda stood. It was telling that, even in the middle of his tirade and with Russell's drawn sword at his throat, Vadi immediately put aside his argument and stood respectfully.
You are quite correct, Chancellor,
she said, somewhat reluctantly.
Ganondorf has obtained a potent magical power, one that he feels would guarantee him victory in a direct confrontation with myself. I have been contemplating for some time which course of action would be best in this circumstance.
Cole, still ruddy-faced, attempted to compose himself.
I would think that in this situation,
he said,
your first obligation would be to the safety of your citizens. Now wait just a minute.
Russell sheathed his sword and stepped back from Vadi.
If what you say is true, then it's obvious that he's trying to goad you into a direct confrontation. The assault on the high street, the murder of Magistrate Dotur, and now Ingo 3 days ago. Your Commandant has a point,
Vadi agreed.
But so does Cole. If you intend to allow this string of violence to continue, then I am afraid that there is no option but to relieve you of your authority.
Zelda looked the 3 of them over, fiercely loyal Russell, casually disobedient Vadi, and the irrelevant Cole. It was unlikely that Vadi was actually capable of following through on his threat, although she did not doubt that he would try. And it would not do to have such division within the castle, for she was certain that Ganondorf would seize that opportunity, as well. She scolded herself for only realizing this now. Of course Ganondorf would have been aware of the circumstances his acts of terrorism were creating within the castle walls. He had been engineering this instability ever since Link had come to Hyrule, waiting for a moment when he could take advantage of a moment of weakness. If she was going to fight, she concluded, it would have been on her own terms.
Cole is correct, she announced, my obligation is indeed to the safety of my citizens. However, it would be extremely unwise to rush into a confrontation with the Gerudo, especially with the power they now wield.
She looked Vati in the eyes.
I need to trust every one of my soldiers implicitly.
Vati smiled and, in a rare, albeit false, show of deference, bowed.
If it means putting an end to the Gerudo threat, then I am yours to command, Princess. Very well.
She retreated into thought for a moment. Ganondorf would be expecting a confrontation. However, he and Zelda shared a crucial weakness, an unwillingness to tell their subordinates anything more than precisely what they needed to know. And that meant that, if they acted fast, the core of the Gerudo could be brought down before they knew what hit them.
Tonight, then.
There is a place, high enough in the city of Hyrule, that the rooftops are bathed in light, and low enough that they are still shadowed by building taller still, where there is a garden. It is a place imbued with magic, unbelievably lush, a green jewel set in vast pillars of stone, spanning several rooftops with vines and trees and wood that almost seems to be alive the way it arcs and contorts. Carved statues on crumbling plinths line the pathways that wend their way through the gardens, and bridges of white stone span the gaps between buildings, covered by probing tendrils of ivy. The trees are ancient, some as tall as buildings, their branches tightly interwoven and their leaves stretching out to cover swathes of grass and forest in soft shadows. Even their trunks are overgrown, vines and flowers clutching at their sides and hanging loosely from limbs high above the ground, a network as tightly woven and beautiful as any spider's web. Technically, the artificial forest is a part of the Forest Temple, a vast hallowed castle dedicated to the worship of nature, and the very center of the garden is atop its flat roof. But the Forest Temple is at its heart a business, a vendor of sanctity and ultimately just another part of the cutthroat city, while the garden has become something else entirely. Sitting cross-legged in the grass, under the shade of a tree almost as tall as the spires around it, just beside a curving stone pathway and elegant marble fountain, was Ganondorf.
How did you find me?
He said, after a time, to the only other person in the gardens. They were oddly deserted today, it seemed.
The same way you found me, the first night I was here.
The Triforce thrummed within Link, identifying the power of its sibling sitting in the grass. The symbol of the power glowed on the back of his hand.
If I listen to it, I can hear it, wanting to join its sisters.
When Ganondorf said nothing more, Link continued.
You lied to me. I did not tell you the truth. There is a difference.
He took a deep breath. The air seemed softer, sweeter here. The shade cast by the leaves was somehow so much more comfortable than the hard-edged umbra cast by the city.
Not in my books. I didn't think you needed to know. You didn't think I needed to know about this?
Link asked, making no effort to hide his contempt.
That, because of this I was the tiebreaker in some sort of eternal game between you and Zelda? You think keeping it a secret was a good idea? I was going to find out somehow. You met the princess, I assume.
It was an odd reversal of roles that Link would suddenly be so open and brash, and Ganondorf so calm. But he had really been expecting this conversation ever since the night he had met Link, so perhaps that was the reason for his composure.
Never think you can decide what I need to know,
Link said darkly.
Zelda's told me the truth, which is much more than I can say for you. Don't be mistaken and think that anything Zelda does is for your sake. She is using you. And you aren't. I don't see other people as a means to an end, if that's what you mean.
Ganondorf felt the Triforce resonate once again, although he thought it likely that Link didn't notice. If he did, it was almost certain he didn't realize what it meant.
Everything that I do is for the sake of the people in this city. Like murder.
Ganondorf bit back a heated retort. In the cool moisture of the gardens he found his inner calm once more.
Ingo was a criminal. He deserved worse than what he got.
Link could not think of many things worse than being left to the jaws of the beast that roamed the city at night.
So your solution is to sink to their level? My solution, Link, is whatever is necessary. I care for this city, for its people. There are only 3 things in this world that Zelda cares about.
At Link's wordless inquiry, Ganondorf held up his own hand, upon which the Triforce burned still. He continued.
She would in an instant condemn everybody in Hyrule to die if it meant the complete power of the Triforce was within her grasp.
Although Link took this with a grain of salt, the truth was that he really did think Ganondorf was the lesser of 2 evils when compared to Zelda. The princess had displayed far too much callousness for him to ever see her as someone he could trust.
You're a member of the Gerudo, Link. My people are gone, which makes all of you the only family I have left. Glad we cleared this up, then.
Link said.
Glad we did.
He turned to leave. He had told Midna he wouldn't be gone long.
You've still got a lot to explain if you want my help, though. Naturally. But, Link.
Link stopped.
There are still some things I cannot tell you. And there are things that even I do not understand.
He nodded, reluctantly, and then left, leaving Ganondorf alone in the garden above the forest temple. His tall form folded up onto the ground, and Ganondorf closed his eyes and began to meditate. He sat there in the grass for some time. A casual passerby might have made the mistake of thinking that he was asleep. The birds continued their song and the gentle breeze flicked at the long red hair of the Gerudo leader, occasionally breaking the peaceful silence with the warm rustling noise of the leaves.
Gods damn it! You stupid idiot! Where are you?
Midna continued to mutter under her breath as she tore through the market district of Hyrule, leaping from shadow to shadow like an exceptionally foul-mouthed ghost. An hour ago Link had strolled out of the Spirit Temple, mentioning that he was heading to Cremia's for a quick drink and that anybody who needed him could find him there. He hadn't been there. And it seemed like had never been anywhere near Cremia's, or indeed the entire market district, Midna angrily concluded after searching with frantic desperation for 20 minutes. It hadn't been long after Link left. Vissen had burst noisily through the doors of the Spirit Temple, dressed, oddly enough, in the armor of the royal guards. He had quickly explained that his day job was as a spy in the castle for Ganondorf, and he had learned that the guards were going to be conducting a raid on the Spirit Temple that very night, just before sundown. With 2 of their most powerful assets missing, they barely stood a chance. Fortunately, Vissen knew where Ganondorf went, during those mysterious disappearances of his. And Link had left a forwarding address. The 2 of them had wasted no time. But now it seemed that either Link had already left, or he had never been there at all. Midna, swearing furiously, continued to search the crowded streets of the market, flitting at a breakneck pace from the shadows of a business-like Deku scrub to a child playing happily on his flute to a Zora selling swimwear to an angry purple boy. Wait. Like everything that day, it all happened horribly fast. With what felt like a painfully tight grip around her ankle, Midna was forcibly hauled out of the shadows and into the material world, the waning sunlight momentarily blinding her sensitive eyes the way it always did. In those first few moments of delirious distraction she tried to summon a magical shield of darkness, but it was effortlessly shattered. A blow, magic or material, struck her in the back of the head and her stone helm momentarily slid forward to block her vision. Whatever had snagged her wrapped about her ankles again and slammed her into the ground. The market denizens screamed. There was the sound of many feet at once, some fleeing, some rushing forward. Midna smiled savagely and righted her headgear. Someone had attacked her while she was inside the shadows, which meant that someone had advanced knowledge of the magic necessary to perform such an assault. There were not very many people in Hyrule who knew shadow magic, and her heart skipped a beat as her mind leapt to the likely identity of her assailant. Sure enough, when she adjusted her helm and could see again, Zant loomed menacingly directly above her. She flung all the fire she could muster at him, searing the air white-blue with the force of her hatred. The spell was dangerously reckless, more than potent enough to engulf them both. But the flames were extinguished in an instant. The air itself vanished around them, depriving the fire of the fuel it needed to exist and unceremoniously snuffing the spell out.
"Give up,"
said a drawling voice. Vadi, the second vizier, floated to the ground behind her. Midna saw guards elbowing their way through the rapidly dispersing crowd, rushing forwards. Far too many guards for this to be an ordinary day at market.
"Don't give up,"
Zant whispered in what was almost a loving tone.
"Fight. Fight me. Please. Let me kill you. I need to."
Two of the most experienced and powerful magi in the world, along with an inordinate amount of reinforcements and all the pointy metal that entailed. Midna's fingers, almost involuntarily, began to trace patterns that glowed in the air.
"You don't seriously intend to fight?"
Vadi spoke as if to an ignorant child, watching cautiously as she wove the spell.
"You can't possibly win." "Wanna bet?"
Midna asked, plunging her arms shoulder-deep once more into flame and shadow. Something was wrong at the spirit temple. It was late enough that, although the sun was not yet set, that the lamps should have been lit inside, and yet, Link could see through the unshuttered windows that this was not the case. So it was with his sword drawn that he stepped through the door and over the threshold, tentatively calling out, "Hello!" The floorboards creaked, loud in the silence, which was the next thing Link noticed. The spirit temple was almost always noisy, and that should be doubly true now that Link recalled that the particularly loud group of Ashe, Colin, Navi, and Midna had been here when he left. So now Link picked up a shield from its place in the wall, so finely polished that its surface reflected his face as well as any mirror. He stepped adroitly from the foyer and into the mess of clutter that comprised the excuse for a building. Stepping through the gathering darkness, he cursed the mess that could have a surprise attack strike from just about any angle and hide nearly a full complement of men. It turned out, however, that the greatest threat was not hidden at all. When he had left, Midna, Colin and Ashe had been sitting around a table playing a card game, Midna floating in midair as always, while the other two reclined lazily on an overstuffed couch. There was only one person on the couch now, a middle-aged man who sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking mournfully into nothing. He was wearing a flawless set of armor, replete with a gold-trimmed cape, and numerous badges of rank. Link almost didn't recognize Russell, and struggled to place him until he turned and spoke.
"Hello, Link."
Link settled immediately into a fighting stance, but couldn't bring himself to strike while the man was seated, while his weapon was still sheathed. Perhaps it was honor, and perhaps it was the overwhelming feeling that it was precisely what Russell wanted.
"Don't do that. Please. Put your sword away."
Russell stood, slowly, and as he did so the spirit temple was suddenly filled with a cacophony of jangling armor as soldiers, no longer hidden, revealed themselves. He was surrounded. Link looked calmly around him, and knew he was beat. He sheathed his sword and unbuckled the shield.
"Where are they?"
he asked.
"Unharmed,"
Russell said.
"I see you've become acquainted with my son, Colin."
An odd fire burned in the commandant's eyes.
"I'm very proud of him, you know." "He's a good man,"
Link said defiantly.
"Indeed. Truly a shame. Really, he's just a boy. Far too young for this line of work."
Looking more tired than ever, Russell put out his hand and made a tossing motion.
"Slowly now, please."
Link threw the shield to Russell, who caught it and handed it to the soldier next to him. But when he tossed over his sword, still sheathed, the commandant dropped it as soon as he touched it, a momentary wince of pain the only clue as to what had happened.
"That is interesting."
He examined both of his hands detachedly, the way a doctor might contemplate a grievous wound. At length he unfastened the clasp of his cape and wrapped the sword in that before handing it to the soldier.
"Alfonso, take that up to the castle, please. Make sure that the princess gets hold of it, but tell her not to touch the sword."
The man nodded and hurried off. The other men stepped forward and grabbed hold of Link, resting his hands behind his back. He felt cold iron wrap itself around one, and then both, of his wrists. The guards started to frog march him out of the room.
"No need for that, he can walk on his own."
The soldiers tentatively relaxed their grip on Link. Russell jogged forward and was soon walking beside him as they exited the spirit temple.
Wait here.
Russell stopped him with a hand on his shoulder, and they stood there on the cobbled street. Within minutes, a horse-drawn carriage rolled up to the temple and Link stepped inside, soldiers taking their places on either side of him. Russell sat directly across from him, and the carriage began to move over the rough stone.
You've got a date with the princess.
As the shadows in the garden lengthened, the twinkles of fireflies illuminated the darkening foliage, while at the same time luminous flowers bloomed in cold blue, hidden during the day. The garden bathed by thousands of natural lights was an eerie, beautiful sight, and yet Ganondorf did not cease his meditation. It was some time before his concentration finally broke, and he said,
If you're expecting a show of deference, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Believe me, deference is the last thing I'm expecting from you.
Ganondorf opened his eyes. Although absolutely no sound had been made to signal her approach, the Princess Zelda stood on the stone pathway in front of him. She was dressed for war, in gleaming metal, and with a rapier sheathed at her side. Ganondorf stood.
The first visit you pay to me in years, old friend, and you come looking for a fight. No,
she said.
It's not a fight I'm here for.
Through the trees, out of the darkness, soldiers appeared and torches sparked into life, their light joining that of the plants and insects. The men, all heavily armed, hustled forward and soon Ganondorf was at the center of a ring of torchlight. He reached for his sword, but the motion was stopped by a blade at his throat. He half turned, and a familiar voice greeted him ruefully.
Sorry, boss.
Vincent said. Chapter end.